At 6:40 in the morning, June 23rd, 1944, the quiet forest roads near Sennelager training area in northern Germany carried a sound that German officers had waited nearly 2 years to hear. The ground trembled. 100 tons of steel began to move. The first operational column of the Tiger II heavy tanks rolled slowly out of the assembly yards of Henschel & Son factory in Kassel and toward final training positions. Each vehicle carried the designation Panzerkampfwagen Tiger Ausführung B. To the crews, it was simply called Königstiger, the King Tiger. It was the most heavily armored tank Germany had ever built. But even in that first moment of movement, the machine revealed the problem that would define its entire career. The tanks moved slowly, very slowly. Each vehicle weighed almost 70 tons, powered by a Maybach HL 230 P30 gasoline engine producing 700 horsepower. On paper, the tank could reach 26 miles per hour on roads. In reality, the drivers in the Sennelager training grounds struggled to push the machines past 10 to 12 miles per hour. The strain on the drivetrain was already visible. Transmission gearboxes overheated during short runs. Suspension torsion bars groaned under the enormous weight of the vehicle. Mechanics from Heavy Tank Battalion 503 watched carefully as the tanks crawled over the testing track. Each tank carried the most powerful anti-tank gun fielded during the war, the 8.8 centimeter KWK 43L 71 cannon. The barrel length alone stretched over 21 feet from breech to muzzle brake. At a distance of 2,000 meters, the armor-piercing PSGR 30-943 round could penetrate more than 200 millimeters of steel armor. No Allied tank in 1944 could survive a direct frontal hit at that range. The armor protection of the Tiger II matched the gun. The upper glacis plate measured 150 millimeters thick, angled at 50 degrees. The turret front carried 180 millimeters of armor. For comparison, the American M4 Sherman tank carried only 51 millimeters on its frontal hull. In theory, the Tiger II could destroy enemy tanks long before enemy guns could damage it. That was the theory. Reality on the ground told a different story. Germany had begun designing the vehicle in 1942. After combat encounters with the Soviet T-34 and KV heavy tanks shocked German armored units on the Eastern Front. Adolf Hitler demanded a heavier tank, a tank that could dominate the battlefield through armor and firepower alone. Two companies competed to build it, Porsche and Henschel. Porsche produced an early turret design manufactured by Krupp Works, with a curved front that created a dangerous structural flaw. Incoming shells, striking the curved lower edge, could deflect downward into the thin hull roof. Later production shifted to the Henschel turret, which replaced the curved front with a flat angled plate. By the time these design corrections reached production lines, Germany had already lost the strategic initiative across Europe, and time was running out. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces had landed in Normandy, France. Within 2 weeks, the Western Front required every armored vehicle Germany could deploy. Yet the King Tiger was still in training. The first operational unit assigned to receive the tank was Schwerpanzer Abteilung 503, one of the elite German heavy tank battalions. The battalion structure followed a standard organization, 3 tank companies, each company fielding 14 Tiger II tanks. Total strength, 45 vehicles, including the command tanks of the battalion headquarters. Command of the battalion rested with Major Fromm during the initial conversion period. Crews required weeks of retraining. The Tiger II demanded careful handling. The overlapping road wheel suspension system included 18 large steel wheels per side. Mud and ice could freeze between the wheels, immobilizing the tank in winter conditions. Fuel consumption presented an even larger problem. The tank consumed over 500 liters of gasoline per 100 kilometers of road travel. Germany fuel reserves in 1944 were collapsing under Allied bombing of synthetic fuel plants. A full tank allowed the Tiger II to travel barely 120 kilometers on roads. In combat conditions, the range dropped much lower, and the tank still had not fired a single shot in battle. While the first King Tigers trained in Germany, events on the Eastern Front moved faster than the machines could. On June 22, 1944, the Soviet Union launched Operation Bagration. It was one of the largest offensives of the entire war. 4 Soviet fronts, more than 2 million soldiers, over 6,000 tanks and assault guns. The offensive smashed into the German Army Group Center across Belarus. Entire German divisions collapsed under the assault. The new King Tiger tanks had been designed to stop Soviet armored breakthroughs exactly like this, yet the battalion equipped with them still sat hundreds of miles from the front, steel monsters with unmatched armor, but no battlefield. Inside the training area at Sennelager, drivers of Heavy Tank Battalion 503 continued practicing gear changes and turret rotations. The instructors measured gun accuracy. At 1,000 meters, the 8.8 centimeter cannon repeatedly destroyed target hulks placed on the range. Technically, the tank worked. Strategically, time was slipping away, because even as the first King Tigers completed their training in Germany, another crisis was forming to the west. The Allied armies in Normandy had broken through German defensive lines near St. Lo. Fast American armored divisions were beginning to surge across northern France. And German High Command faced a dangerous decision: send the new King Tiger Battalion east to stop the Soviet advance, or rush the unfinished weapon west to face the Americans. The decision would shape the first battle of the most powerful tank Germany ever built, and it would happen sooner than anyone expected. At 5:30 in the morning, July 11th, 1944, a freight train loaded with the heaviest tanks ever built in Germany rolled slowly across the Rhine River Bridge near Cologne. Each railcar carried a single Tiger II tank of Heavy Tank Battalion 503. The tanks were chained tightly to reinforced flat cars. Their wide combat tracks had been removed and replaced with narrow transport tracks measuring 66 centimeters, the only configurations that allowed the 70-ton vehicles to fit within European railway clearance limits. Even with the transport tracks installed, the tanks barely cleared station platforms. Inside the railcars, the crews waited beside their vehicles. They knew the destination: Normandy. The German High Command had made the decision only days earlier. The Soviet offensive in the east was catastrophic, but the Western Front presented an immediate political crisis. Allied forces had landed in France, and the German leadership feared a rapid collapse that could expose the borders of Germany itself. Heavy armor was needed in the west. The King Tiger would face its first battle against American and British forces. Yet, even before reaching the front, the problems began. On July 13th, while unloading near Amiens, mechanics discovered severe damage in several tank transmissions. The enormous weight of the vehicles had strained internal gears during rail transport. 2 tanks required immediate repair. Another suffered damage to the final drive assembly, a mechanical system that transferred power from the engine to the drive sprockets. The Tiger series had always suffered from fragile final drives, and the added weight of the Tiger II made the problem worse. The battalion arrived with fewer operational tanks than planned. By July 18th, the battalion deployed south of Caen, where British and Canadian forces had begun Operation Goodwood, a massive armored offensive intended to break through German defenses east of the Orne River. This was exactly the type of battle the King Tiger had been designed for: wide open ground, massed enemy armor, long-range gunnery. The German defensive line in this sector included units from 1st SS Panzer Corps, supported by heavy tanks of Schwer Panzerabteilung 503. At 8:15 in the morning, British artillery began a bombardment unlike anything seen on the Western Front. More than 2,000 Allied guns fired simultaneously. Then came the air attack. Over 1,000 Royal Air Force bombers struck German defensive positions along the ridge south of Caen. The ground shook continuously for almost an hour. Many of the King Tiger tanks had not yet even reached their defensive firing positions. Several were still maneuvering through narrow country roads when the bombing began. Despite the chaos, the German heavy tanks soon reached hull-down positions overlooking the advance routes of the British armored divisions. Among the advancing units were tanks from the British 11th Armored Division and Guards Armored Division. Most of their vehicles were Sherman medium tanks, armed with 75mm guns, along with some Sherman Firefly tanks carrying the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun. At 10:05 in the morning, the first British tanks crested a low ridge near the village of Cagny. From a concealed position nearly 1,500 meters away, the gunner of a Tiger II from 2nd Company, Heavy Tank Battalion 503, aligned the long 8.8 centimeter barrel. The target was a column of Shermans advancing across open farmland. The gun fired. The shell struck the lead Sherman directly through the frontal armor. The British tank stopped instantly. Within minutes, multiple King Tigers opened fire across the sector. At these distances, the 8.8 centimeter cannon dominated the battlefield. British tank guns struggled to penetrate the thick frontal armor of the German heavy tanks. Yet the King Tiger revealed another weakness: mobility. Many vehicles struggled to reposition quickly as the battle evolved. The enormous weight of the tanks limited movement across soft ground. Some vehicles sank partially into farmland soil, churned by artillery explosions. In one case, a Tiger II, attempting to shift positions near Amyville, threw a track after turning sharply on uneven terrain. The tank became immobile. Crew members worked under fire for nearly 40 minutes attempting repairs. Eventually, they abandoned the vehicle and withdrew. Fuel shortages created another problem. The German armored command structure had expected the heavy tanks to fight short defensive engagements, but the scale of the Allied advance forced repeated repositioning. Each movement burned precious gasoline. By the evening of July 18th, several King Tigers reported fuel levels below 20% capacity. The battalion requested resupply trucks. But Allied fighter aircraft dominated the skies. German supply convoys moving during daylight were frequently destroyed before reaching forward units. Still, tactically, the King Tigers achieved success. During the fighting around Cagny and Bras, several British armored units suffered heavy losses attempting to push through the German line. At long range, the German guns held a clear advantage, but strategy is larger than individual engagements. Operation Goodwood continued for 3 days. British forces committed hundreds of tanks. German defenses held in several sectors, but the constant pressure forced armored units to move repeatedly across the battlefield, and each movement exposed the Tiger II's greatest weakness: mechanical reliability. By July 20th, more King Tigers were disabled by transmission failure and drivetrain damage than by enemy fire. The battalion that had entered Normandy with over 40 heavy tanks now had barely half that number still operational. Yet the real crisis was still approaching. Because 2 weeks later, the American First Army would break through German defenses near St. Lo. Once that happened, the war in France would become a race. Fast-moving American armored divisions would surge toward the German border, and the slow-moving King Tiger would be forced into a role it was never designed to perform: pursuit warfare, against enemies that moved twice as fast. At 7:10 in the morning, August 12, 1944, the crew of a Tiger II from 3rd Company Heavy Tank Battalion 503 waited in a hedgerow outside the village of Vimoutiers in northern France. The driver listened carefully to the engine. The Maybach HL 230P30 produced a deep mechanical vibration inside the 70-ton vehicle. The engine temperature gauge had already climbed higher than normal. The tank had moved less than 12 miles since dawn. This was no longer a defensive battle. It was a retreat. 3 weeks earlier, on July 25th, American forces launched Operation Cobra, the breakout from the Normandy hedgerow country near St. Lo. More than 3,000 American bombers struck German defensive positions. The bombing shattered the already weakened front lines of 7th Army. Within days, fast-moving American armored units from 3rd Army, under Lieutenant General George Patton, began racing south and east across France. Sherman tanks from divisions such as the 4th Armored Division and 6th Armored Division moved rapidly through open countryside. Their vehicles weighed roughly 30 tons, less than half the mass of the King Tiger. Their 4 GAA-58 engines produced 500 horsepower, allowing road speeds of 25 to 30 miles per hour. The strategic difference became obvious almost immediately. American tanks could move fast enough to exploit breakthroughs. The King Tiger could not. Heavy Tank Battalion 503 received orders to move repeatedly in an attempt to plug gaps forming in the German defensive line. Each movement exposed the weaknesses engineers had warned about during development. Transmission failures increased. The 8-speed Maybach Olvar gearbox, designed originally for lighter vehicles, struggled to handle the extreme weight of the tank. Final drive, gears cracked under stress. Even when the tanks remained mechanically functional, the problem of fuel grew worse. Allied bombing campaigns had devastated German synthetic fuel plants at Luna, Politz, and Blechhammer earlier in 1944. Fuel deliveries to armored units were unpredictable and dangerously small. A single Tiger II required roughly 860 liters of gasoline to fill its tanks. In many cases, battalion supply trucks arrived carrying less than half that amount. Crews sometimes received orders to abandon otherwise functional tanks, simply because there was not enough fuel to move them. By August 15th, the German front in Normandy had begun collapsing completely. Allied forces executed a massive encirclement movement that would soon trap large parts of the German army in what became known as the Falaise Pocket. Heavy Tank Battalion 503 attempted to withdraw east toward the Seine River. But the roads were already clogged with retreating vehicles. Horse-drawn artillery wagons, fuel trucks, panzer divisions, attempting to escape the closing Allied ring. The enormous Tiger II tanks struggled to move through the chaos. On several narrow roads, bridges collapsed under their weight. In other cases, mechanical breakdowns blocked entire columns. Near Argentan, one Tiger II threw a track while crossing a damaged road culvert. The 70-ton vehicle could not be moved quickly. The crew attempted repairs, but Allied fighter aircraft soon appeared overhead. The crew destroyed the tank with demolition charges before withdrawing on foot. Scenes like this repeated across the pocket. Some King Tigers still fought effectively when positioned defensively. The 8.8-centimeter KWK-43 cannon remained one of the most powerful anti-tank weapons in the war. American Sherman tanks struck at long range were often destroyed before they could return effective fire. But these successes occurred in isolated moments. Strategically, the weapon had arrived too late. Germany no longer possessed the fuel, the manufacturing capacity, or the stable front lines required to use such a complex heavy tank effectively. Production numbers tell the story clearly. Between January 1944 and March 1945, German factories produced roughly 489 Tiger II tanks. During the same period, the United States produced more than 40,000 Sherman tanks. The Soviet Union produced over 50,000 T-34 tanks during the war. The King Tiger was a masterpiece of engineering and armor and firepower, but warfare had shifted toward mobility, logistics, and mass production. Even when the Tiger II won individual engagements, it could not influence the strategic direction of the war. By August 21st, 1944, the Falaise Pocket closed. More than 50,000 German soldiers were captured. Tens of thousands more were killed or wounded. The surviving German units retreated toward the borders of Germany itself. Among the wrecked vehicles scattered across Normandy were several abandoned King Tigers, some destroyed by Allied aircraft, some crippled by mechanical failure, many simply left behind without fuel. Steel giants built for a war Germany could no longer sustain, the Tiger II would continue fighting in later battles. In the Ardennes offensive in December 1944, in Hungary during the final German counteroffensives of 1945, and eventually inside Germany itself during the last weeks of the war. But the strategic moment when such a weapon might have mattered had already passed. The King Tiger had arrived with unmatched armor, a gun capable of destroying any Allied tank, an engineering that represented the peak of German heavy tank design. Yet it entered the battlefield at a time when Germany was losing control of the skies, the roads, the fuel supply, and the factories needed to sustain modern war. In the end, the tank that seemed unstoppable on paper became a symbol of a larger truth. Superior weapons cannot reverse a collapsing strategy. Even the strongest armor cannot protect an army that has already lost the ability to move.